And this is a major development. You heard the president yesterday talking about, in announcing this latest round of actions, what China's central bank has decided to do, and that is effectively talk to all the banks in their system and tell them, listen, you have to stop doing business with Pyongyang. It's a major step forward in cutting off the source of funding for the North's nuclear program. Here's how the president described this action against Pyongyang.
A new executive order I just signed that significantly expands our authorities to target individuals, companies, financial institutions that finance and facilitate trade with North Korea. Our new executive order will cut off sources of revenue that fund North Korea's efforts to develop the deadliest weapons known to humankind.
Meanwhile, the president's Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, issued a stern warning, Heather, and talking to the folks out there, we're talking about countries and other entities that would want to do business, both with the U.S. and with North Korea. Take a listen.
These sanctions will be forward-looking and applied to behavior that occurs following today when President Trump signed the executive order. Foreign financial institutions are now on notice that going forward, they can choose to do business with the United States or with North Korea, but not both.
And this is the key here, because whether you're talking about China or some other country, you're going to have to pick and choose. And if you're choosing from a business perspective, I think the choice is obvious.
The absurd reality that a person like Trump, a mentally deranged person full of megalomania and complacence, the person who is chastised even by American people as Commander-in-Chief, Lion King, President Evil holds the nuclear button. These are what constitute the gravest threat to the international peace and security today.
Now, North Korea on notice. President Trump appearing ready to take action against the rogue regime at this hour, tweeting this, quote, just heard Foreign Minister of North Korea speak at the UN. If he echoes thoughts of Little Rocket Man, they won't be around much longer. But are Americans ready for military action? Here to weigh in is U.S. Army Green Beret Terry Shepard. Terry, you see where we are right now. We're in unprecedented territory. Some in South Korea are worried, and in Japan they're wondering where this is going. Where do you think we're going with this?
First of all, let me tell you this, Kilmeade. I know you're ducking me in New York, and I'm in an undisclosed location in North Carolina, so you'll see me soon.
Right. I will find you. I know how to, okay?
That's right. I have skills. Hey, listen, nothing should be surprising about what's going on with North Korea. I mean, this is where it was going to be. Victor Davis Hanson, who is one of my favorite writers, a national treasure, wrote an article a while ago talking about what if this is the other way, like America was in control of a rogue state that was belligerent to all of our China's allies, and how long would that go on? There would have been a war already. So, I mean, there's a lot going on. We have the 2nd Infantry Divisions there. There's a lot of conventional forces, but this is good. This would have had to been done sooner or later. And so, yeah, it's edgy and it's a bit scary, but this has to be done. At least in some way, he has to be put in his place.
Right. And right now, if you ask the American people about this, because he does have nuclear weapons, they were asked, and they said 58% favor using diplomatic efforts first, 35% are opposed to doing it. We're at the point now, though, Terry, is whoever was the 45th president would be dealing the same way. But some in the State Department are worried about the bellicose tone of the president. Are you?
No, I'm not that worried about it. Listen, President Trump's going to be President Trump. This is how he's going to be. He's always been this way. I actually kind of filter out a lot of the way he says stuff or even what he says. But you bring a good point. Whoever was in charge right now would have to deal with this. I think President Trump's at least strong stance is the right way to go, because it's gotten us nothing to this point. You know, we've placated them. We've played games with them. And we've got nothing for it except more threats to us and, of course, our allies, which are very important to us. And we can't discount that. So ignore the talk. I tell people in the U.S., please just ignore the talk and just watch what the president does. More importantly, watch what our enemies do in response to him. That's what really matters.
Terry, you know, overwhelmed because of this NFL stuff over the weekend, but last week was a great week for the president and making diplomatic inroads with some of the people we need to put the pressure on North Korea, namely China. That's what I sense. He's building up the personal relationships just 8 months in.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, man. I mean, here's the thing. China, North Korea has been China's pit bull for quite a long time now. And China knows this. But China also has a good gig dealing with the West. And they realize if North Korea goes too far, that money, that gig, that's going to go away. So eventually this is going to work in China's interest to curb North Korea. And I think, again, people don't realize that part of the world values strength. It values, someone with an iron fist behind it. And before this, we haven't had a president who was really that way.
And I'm glad you put your personal animus towards me to the side to talk about North Korea. Thank you very much, Terry.
I did, Brian, because, you and I are sort of friends, and I want to maintain that.
I know. Somehow, some way, we'll weather the storm. Thanks so much, Terry.
Tensions are incredibly high tonight between the United States and North Korea, two nuclear powers who both seem increasingly credible in their threats to use catastrophically powerful weapons against each other. Today, North Korea's foreign minister said that President Trump's warnings to his country amounted to a declaration of war, and that's some pretty serious stuff. Joining us now for a reaction here in New York is Daniel Henninger. He's deputy editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal, and in Washington, Marie Harf, a Fox News contributor, and a former top aide to Secretary of State John Kerry during the Obama administration. Dan, if I could start with you, you believe that Kim Jong-un is finally starting to feel isolated. Why do you say that?
Well, I think for a couple of reasons, Dana. For one, things that have happened in the last few weeks. The United States last week announced that it was raising sanctions against North Korea, which is to say Secretary of State Mnuchin announced that they would not do financial business with any country doing business with the North Koreans. That was a significant increase in the level of sanctions, and that happened simultaneous with the Chinese, at least since June, have by and large cut off North Korea's bank accounts completely. And that means that, for instance, trade across the Chinese border with South Korea has fallen by about 75%. Fuel prices in North Korea are rising. And so I think Kim understands that he is becoming increasingly isolated. You have had comments in Chinese media, even Chinese scholars, saying Kim Jong-un has to go, which is very unusual. And I think Kim understands his problem is not only the United States, but the Chinese. I think there's a bigger wedge between China and North Korea than most people believe. Ever since Kim assassinated his uncle in 2013, who was the main contact between them, and there has really been very little contact, I think, between the Chinese and the North Koreans. And so Kim has, at this point, has got to feel he doesn't have too many options left to him.
So, Marie, one of the things that I know that you have said is that there is a concern about an escalation of rhetoric. But so what Dan was just talking about is concrete actions that have possibly led to more isolation, which might hopefully lead to a change of behavior. But in the meantime, what do you think about sort of the war of words?
Well, that's the exact issue. You're exactly right. And what Dan outlined is actually a strategy that a lot of Democrats and Republicans support. Putting more pressure on China, getting additional sanctions. That is a strategy that I think might get us to a better place. But my question has always been, what does President Trump want as the end goal here? And I am concerned that some of this rhetoric, this escalatory cycle, this tit for tat of calling each other names on the world stage, that has the real potential to, balloon out of control. And for a leader like Kim Jong-un, who's so irrational, most would say, or at least crazy, how he views what President Trump says, that impacts his calculation. And I just worry that we're rolling towards a situation where military force might have to be used or might be used against us or our allies because of this really outlandish war of words. I want a strategy that sounds like what Dan's talking about. I don't want our presidents tweeting at each other.
Well, we're not going to be able to stop them from talking to each other. But one of the things, Dan, that you think is there is a possible endgame option. Can you describe that?
Well, I mean, I don't want to create a strategy for Kim Jong-un, but if he were smart, what he would do is grab something that is already on the table, and that is the Iran nuclear deal that President Obama and John Kerry struck with Iran. I'm not a big believer in that deal. But if Kim Jong-un were to say, I'm willing to sit down and talk about doing a deal of the sort that Iran did with the United States, I think President Trump would be under tremendous pressure to do that. It would allow Kim to at least have the space within which I think he would probably cheat, but it would allow him to have a kind of modus vivendi without giving up much of his program over the short term.
So in the next couple of weeks, Marie, I understand that the president has to, under the law, basically certify whether Iran is complying with the agreement or not. There is mixed signals coming from the administration as to how that is going to go down. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, the challenge for the administration is that within the 159 pages of the deal, Iran is technically in compliance. Now, the administration doesn't like things they're doing outside of the deal. I would argue that the best way to deal with those other things like support for terrorism, ballistic missiles, is to deal with them with all the other tools we have. Why would you walk away from a nuclear deal that today is preventing them from getting a weapon? And playing to North Korea here, North Korea shows us that our options with countries are much more limited when they get nuclear weapons. That after they cross that threshold, the options for action go way down. Iran is not there yet. So why would you walk away from an agreement that, while not perfect, is preventing them from getting there?
Let me ask Daniel a final quick word, which is North Korea already, though, have they crossed that threshold?
North Korea has, well, it depends how you define it. If you define it as being able to attach a nuclear warhead, which they have, to a intercontinental ballistic missile, which they have, in other words, to be able to create a delivery system, then you have crossed the nuclear threshold. Then we were going to be in a brave and very unfortunate new world. And that's why I think Donald Trump is in his rights to talk tough with Kim Jong-un. And I have the slightest doubt that Jim Mattis and Mr. McMaster and even the CIA are at this point assembling an array of military options, gradually escalating pressure on Kim Jong-un to step down from crossing that nuclear threshold.
All right, Marie and Daniel, thank you so much. Excellent commentary. Appreciate it.
Retired four-star General Jack Keane, a former Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army and the chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, and, of course, a Fox News military analyst. General, always good to have you on. Good to see you.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So we've heard those two responses. We'd love yours this morning.
Well, I think, I've been watching President Trump for 9 months very closely and listening to all of his advisors and what they're doing. And I really believe the strategic framework for the United States has changed rather dramatically. He is putting the United States back on a global stage as a world power, promoting peace, prosperity, and stability. And he's reassuring our allies in the Far East, in the Middle East, in Europe, and also in South America. Then he's wanting, and this is where we are now, he's wanting to confront our adversaries in a way that the previous administration has never done. And the other thing I think, when I think about what Trump is doing with Kim Jong-un, this is about big power competition. And when you think back on it historically and strategically, Roosevelt, Kennedy, Reagan, and now Trump. And it has to do with, the occasions that they were dealing with. Not as much as about them, but they were given historic moments to deal with. And they all understood the same thing, that big power competition was a fundamental test of will. And Trump, I think, instinctively knows this.
General,
and that's what's going on.
General, do you believe we've had now more than 20 missile tests flying over our allies in many cases, the president saying that at some point we're going to cross the line. Is it your sense, would you be advising President Trump today that we are nearing a point where we're going to have to take a preemptive move or respond in something more than what we saw yesterday, which was a simple show of power buzzing with our B-1 bombers?
Yeah, I mean, what happened here is the Kim dynasty, 3 presidents permitted nuclear weapons, and Kim Jong-un recalculated during the Obama administration that saving his regime by pointing nuclear weapons at South Korea wasn't sufficient. So he decided he wanted to be like Russia and China and point nuclear weapons at the American people, nuclearized ICBMs. And that would absolutely preserve his regime, probably influenced a little bit by what happened in Iraq, even more so by what happened in Libya. All that said, Obama, I believe, took the military option off the table, and Kim Jong-un knew that. Trump has put the military option back on the table, and the recalculation is taking place, and that is why China is complicit with the United States' request that all nations who are dealing with North Korea have got to shut down trade. And China has agreed to that. That's never, ever happened before. So the threat of Trump using the military option is in the head of President Xi, and it's in the head of Kim Jong-un. We'll see what happens in the future.
Great point. I mean, the credible threat of military force is required if you want to get anything done diplomatically or through states like China. Thank you very much for your time, General Jack Keane.
Good to see you, General.
Appreciate it.